Hello everyone! In this lesson, we will continue to work on the edit and delete features for our My Notes user interface. So here I am on the My Notes page, and in our previous lesson, we worked on this delete button. And now the first thing I want to do in this lesson is make this delete button flexible. Because you might remember that in the previous lesson, we hard-coded the ID number to always point towards a specific post. Let me show you what I mean. So jump into your text editor, and within the theme folder, let's look within the JS folder and then the modules folder, and open up our My Notes JS. And within our delete note method, for the URL, remember we hard-coded a specific ID number at the end here. And we only did this as a quick test. We don't actually want this. Because as it stands, no matter which delete button you click on, it's always going to try to delete that one post with this ID. So instead of hard-coding an ID number here, let's set things up so that when you click the delete button, our JavaScript detects which post it's sitting next to and grabs the ID for that specific post. Now before we set that up, why don't we first go into the admin dashboard and dig into the trash and restore the note post that we deleted at the very end of the previous lesson. So that way we have multiple posts to work with once again. So over in my dashboard, if I click on Notes in the sidebar, and then right here, if I click on Trash, here's the note post that matches the ID number that we hard-coded. So it was successfully deleted, but just as a test, let's restore it. Okay, and now back on the front end, if I refresh, cool, we've got two posts again. So now let's work to make the delete button flexible and use the ID of whatever post it's sitting right next to. So back in our text editor, if we want our JavaScript to find the actual ID number for the relevant post, we need to make sure that that ID number lives somewhere in our HTML so that our JavaScript can find it. So let me show you what I mean. Right now, let's jump into page-mynotes.php, and let's scroll down to the list item that's getting output once for each note post. Right, this is the input for the title, this is the text area for the body. And what I want to do on the opening li tag is add a data attribute. So let's say data, and then we can make up whatever name we want. Let's just call it ID. So data ID equals, and then within the quotes, we can just drop into PHP and call a WordPress function named the_ID. Cool, now if we save that, and then jump back into our browser, and be sure to refresh if you're not using the preview proxy server. But now if I maybe right-click on the edit button and choose inspect, cool, so you can see that here's the overall bulleted list, the UL, and then each note is a list item, and now the ID for that matching post lives in our HTML. So now in our JavaScript, we can access the relevant ID number depending on which delete button you click on. So let's go update our JavaScript right now. Back in the text editor, over in our JavaScript, within our delete note method, we need to know which element got clicked on. Now luckily, when we set up this event listener up here, when it detects a click and then fires off this function in response, it's going to pass along information about the event into that function. So within the parentheses for this function definition, we can include a parameter. You could call it event, or you could name it whatever you want, but a lot of times people just say E, which is a lot quicker to type than event. Okay, but with that in place, now within the body of this function, we can access the specific element that got clicked on. So check this out. Maybe right before the beginning of this Ajax line, let's add a new line, and let's create a variable, and we could name it whatever we want. Let's call it this note. And I want this variable to point towards the list item that contains the delete button that just got clicked on. So I'm going to use jQuery, and what I want to select is e.target. we can look within that parameter that contains information about what got clicked on. We can look inside it for the target. Okay, so this will be the particular delete button that got clicked on. And then right after that, we can say dot parents to look for one of its ancestor elements. And then let's just look for an li tag, because that's the overall element that contains the data attribute with the ID number. Cool, so now we've got this variable that we can use down on this line. So check this out. Let's delete the hard-coded number here and keep the /, and then right after the quotes, let's just add on something new and then say this note, which is this new variable that we created. And then we can access its data attributes by saying .data, and then just include whatever attribute you're looking for, which in our case is ID. And even though we named the data attribute data-ID, when you use the jQuery data method, you don't need to include the data dash. So we can just say ID. Cool, and this will get us the ID number for the relevant post. So let's go ahead and save this, and then back in the browser. Before we click on one of the delete buttons, I recommend performing a hard refresh, because sometimes the browser will use a cached copy of our JavaScript. So to do that, you can hold down Control or Shift and click the browser's reload button. Okay, and then if I try to delete biology lecture, click delete, check the console, we see congrats, and if I refresh the page, biology's gone. And then if I try to delete math lecture, refresh, cool, now they're both gone. However, we shouldn't have to manually refresh the page. If our JavaScript detects that the delete request was successful, I think we should remove the note from the page on the fly. So to practice doing that, let's go restore those trashed or deleted posts. So back in the admin dashboard, refresh your notes screen. And then if we click on trash, let's just restore both of them. Go back into trash, restore the other one. Cool. Now let's go update our JavaScript so that if a delete request is successful, we just fade out and delete that post from the page in real time, on the fly. So back in our JavaScript, within our delete note method, let's focus on the success property, right? This is the function that's going to run if the delete request is successful. So maybe right above this console.log line, let's add a new line, and let's just say this note. Remember, that's the variable that we just created that points towards the parent list item, and that list item contains everything related to that post. So we can just basically delete that from the page. So this note, and then just say dot, and jQuery has a method named slideUp, which basically removes the element from the page using a nice slide up animation. So let's go ahead and save that, test it out on the front end. So if I try to delete math lecture, cool. Let's try biology. Perfect. So that takes care of the ability to delete notes. Now let's change gears and learn how to edit notes. But first, why don't we jump into our admin dashboard and restore those two deleted or trashed notes so that we have dummy data to work with. So back in the admin, refresh the note screen, click on trash, and if I check the box for both of them and then choose restore, apply, cool, they are both restored. Okay, and now let's learn how to send updates back to the WordPress server. So for example, if you clicked on math lecture and you could change the title to math notes number 20, well, then the question becomes, how do we send this new data to the WordPress server? How can we update an existing post from the front end of our site? Well, the answer is we would send a request to this exact same URL, only instead of a delete request, we would send a post request. And also send along a bit of data that contains the new title and the new body content. Now before we go ahead and set up that new Ajax post request, why don't we first improve the user experience of this layout? So the next few minutes are not going to have anything to do with WordPress specifically. This is just going to be about JavaScript and creating an easy to understand user experience. Because at the moment, this can be a bit confusing. Before clicking on this text, you might not even realize that this is an editable field, right? Because when you first load the page, it just looks like normal text. Visually, it does not look like a text input field. Same thing with the body text. So why don't we adjust things so that when you first load the page, these fields are set to be read-only, so that your web browser literally will not let you make changes to them. And then we can set things up so that when you click the Edit button, it removes the read-only attribute, so then you can modify the fields again. And also we can add borders around the fields so that they look like a text field. And we can even focus the user's cursor to automatically appear within this title field. Okay, and while you are in this edit mode, we can also have a button down here that says Save. And then once you click that Save button, that is what will trigger our post request to a REST API URL. I know that was a bit of rambling and a lot to sink in, so now let's just code it together bit by bit at a nice pace. Our first goal is to make these inputs read-only. So to do that, back in our editor, let's jump into our page-mynotes.php file. And within our list item, here's the input field for the title. All we need to do is say read-only. Okay, let's do the same thing for the text area, which is the body field. Right on the opening text area tag, just say read-only. Okay, then if I save that, now, if I try to click on those fields, I cannot make any changes. Okay, so next, let's set things up so that when you click the Edit button, it removes those read-only attributes, and we also add a little Save button down here. So to do that, let's jump back into our JavaScript file, our mynotes.js module. Let's scroll up to the very top, and within our events area, let's add a new line. Actually, let's just copy and paste this existing line for delete note, copy it, duplicate it, and let's change the selector to look for a class of edit note. And when it gets clicked, let's trigger a method named, you might have guessed it, edit note. All right, now let's go ahead and create a method with that exact matching name. So down here, edit note, parentheses, curly brackets. Okay, and because there might be multiple edit buttons on the screen, when one of them gets clicked on, we need to know which set of fields it's associated with. And the common denominator amongst all the elements that I'm selecting now is the overall parent list item. So, just like we did in our delete note method, why don't we just copy and paste this line where we set up a variable named this note. So I'm just going to copy that and paste it into my edit note function. Okay, and then right below that, let's write a bit of code that removes the read-only attributes from the relevant fields. So we can say this note to select the relevant overall list item, and then we can just look inside the list item with a jQuery method named find. And what do we want to look for? How about an element with a class of note title field, comma, as well as an element with a class of note body field. Okay, and while we have those elements selected, at the end here, let's remove an attribute. This is a handy jQuery method. And the attribute that we want to remove is read only. And while we're at it, at the end of this line, let's chain on one more action. So dot, and let's say add class, and let's give those inputs a class of note active field, and that will give them an animated border, so it makes it a bit more obvious that they are editable fields. Okay, let's be sure to end this line with a semicolon. Okay, and then let's give that a save. And now on the front end, if I try to edit this first post, whoops, it didn't work, so let's check our console. And the error message says that E is not defined. Aha, I know exactly what I did wrong. You might have noticed this and you might have been yelling at the screen. Within our edit note function, if we want to be able to access e.target, we need to be sure to pass e as a parameter within the parentheses for this function definition. Okay, so with that e parameter in place, let's save it again. And now when I click edit, cool, we can see an animated border around the fields, and if I click on them, I can actually make edits. Okay, next, let's set things up so that while you are in this edit mode, a little blue button appears down here that says Save. So let's go add that button in our PHP file. So over in Page My Notes PHP, right below the text area, let's add a new button or a new span. Actually, in order to save a bunch of typing, we can just copy and paste the existing edit button right here. Copy that, paste it down below the text area. And let's change this text. So instead of saying edit, it says save. And on the opening span tag, let's change the class. So instead of edit note, let's say update note. And just for styling reasons, let's also say btn and btn -- blue and btn -- small. Okay, and then finally, instead of the pencil edit icon, let's delete the word pencil and replace it with arrow -right. Okay, so let's go ahead and save that. And the blue button is going to be hidden by default. And then once someone clicks on the edit button, we can display the blue button. So back in our JavaScript, within our edit note method, let's add a new line and say this note, which is the overall list item. Let's look inside it and find an element that has a class of update note. And let's just give that a new class. So add class of update note -- visible, which will make it so the button is no longer hidden. So let's save that. And now when I click edit, cool, the little save button appears. However, I don't want users to feel like clicking save is their only option. So I think it would be nice if once you click edit, then this edit button turns into a cancel button. And instead of a pencil icon, maybe it has a little X. And if you click on the cancel button, then that takes you out of the edit mode. So then the animated borders would go away, the fields would become read-only again, and the blue button would disappear. And as you might have guessed, that's exactly what we're going to learn how to do in the next lesson. So let's keep things rolling, and I will see you then.